Okay, welcome everyone. This is April 23rd, and we're going to dive into Gene Key 27, Soul Talks with Kenlon, and this activation of the frequency inside of Gene Key 27. And this is like my favorite, one of my favorite gene keys. And I don't have this, it's undefined in my chart, it's undefined in my human design chart. And yet it speaks to me really deeply. It's the gene key for healers. So it's also the gene key, I believe, of the feminine principle in our world. So both men and women can have this gene key, but it feels like a very feminine gene key. It knows something about the way life works. And it knows something about love. And ultimately, that's where we're going to go. We're going to go to the frequency of love. So inside of the gene keys, we have the three energies of the shadow frequency, the gift frequency, and the siddhi, the highest version of that expression. And that siddhi always brings us into a state of enlightenment. So it's like 64 flavors of enlightenment when we touch in the gene keys. And I've been studying a bit about enlightenment, as I have throughout my life been very interested in non-duality, but also lately in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And one of the questions I asked myself, and this turned out to be an auspicious question that I asked myself. And that question was, where is love? Where is love? I asked that question to myself in my 30s, and I went to India and I came back and I began to associate with an organization called Free a Child that was fighting child sex trafficking in Nepal. And that question was alive for me. Does love live even there? Because if love is really love, then it lives everywhere. And as someone who has come through childhood wounds, anybody else come through childhood wounds, we really come back. Yeah, right. It's coming back to love, returning to love. And so in my Tibetan Book of the Dead studies, someone asked a question. I'm kind of framing the end in mind, and then we're going to go to the shadow, and this is the ring of life and death. So of course we get to bring death into this mix. So someone asked the question to the teacher, I don't hear a lot about love in Tibetan Buddhism. Is it there? And she was sharing how, like, she's older now, and she was saying, 25 years ago, I had this experience of massive heart-opening love. Has anyone ever had that experience where you were just blown open and you knew it was a mystical event? Yeah, I'm seeing some of your hands. I've had that experience too. And the thing about that experience is, like, oftentimes it doesn't last. And then we go back into the drift. We go back into the collective shadow frequency, but we know it's there. So this woman said that she was asking that question because she didn't feel it anymore. And at that period of time, it was so real and so alive for her. And the teacher said, yes, actually, the word that the Tibetans use is luminous emptiness. And I loved that. It's like a code so that it doesn't get so trite, because love doesn't mean the thing that it means at the movies. It doesn't mean this sticky, gooey, oh, I'm so in love. And then we're swinging on a pendulum that we could actually really hate that person that we say we love in whatever amount of time. That's induality. That's something else. That's infatuation or idealization or whatever. But love is this ineffable quality of the universe. And so it's fitting that, so after, I don't even know why I that at that moment, it really struck a chord with me. And I didn't really know why until I went into my own journey space, preparing for the ceremony that we're going to do today. And massive fear came up. Just, I haven't had this kind of visibility into fear, but that's what I've really been working with all year. So I guess, I just got served up what was already under the surface. And that's why I really do love plant medicine journeys, because that kind of stuff comes right up. And if you have cultivated enough nervous system safety and strength, then it becomes something that, like, I can touch. I can actually go there. I can actually witness it. And I already know enough to know that they don't last forever. So this experience that I'm having that I'm not enjoying of all this intense fear is not going to last forever. I already know that. But I touch in on that fear. And when I'm in that fear, I realize that fear is fear. You can call it any kind of fear you want: fear of abandonment, fear of scarcity, fear of being alone. All of those are flavors of something that's much deeper, and that's just fear. It's fear. And fear to me is separation. And when I sat with that fear long enough, what bubbled up inside me was a question, and that was, where is love? And I started bawling, because I knew that what I needed and what the medicine of the whole world is love. It's to be restored to that experience of connection with all things. And this is Gene Key 27. I didn't even know that until I just said that. And that's the weird thing about these gene keys, is like, when you start to contemplate them, you have all these experiences and you're like, how did that even happen? So another experience that I'm going to share that ties in was, before I even began on this inquiry, I think it was really what started it off. It was Friday morning. I went to go hiking, and in California, there's this iconic hike, but you have to wait for parking. The parking's tricky. And so everyone kind of drives, like, everything's parked sort of horizontal, or like vertically, diagonally. That's the word, diagonally. And so you can wait vertically until that diagonal spot opens up. And so, because people are always coming and going in that hiking trail. And so I was waiting, and then someone was pulling out, and I'm like, oh, good, I'm next in line. But the guy behind me thought he was next in line. Right. And I'm just, and I have, I'm under this like time pressure thing. I feel this time thing, like I got to get this hike done. So this guy's like, no, he's going to take it. And I didn't know what I had planned, but I got out of the car and I went up to his window and I said, hey, I'm thinking that that's my spot. And he said, well, I'm thinking that that's my spot. And he shared a little bit about why he thought that was the truth. And I said, well, I can see that you really want this. He goes, yeah, I really want it. And I said, okay, you can have it. And I walked back into my car, and I have that same feeling happening right now. I started bawling. And this isn't like to virtue signal that I'm super awesome, because I had no idea what was going to happen in that space. But what happened was something that I call mythic. It's when Kenlin gets out of the way and an energy is able to flow through me that actually blesses me. It's a blessing to the person, but it's a blessing to myself. So I sat there and I just bawled, because I knew I was the recipient of this love. And then as I was crying, I looked up, and right in front of me, someone left that parking spot, and I pulled in. And if that would have never happened, that would have been totally fine. And I would have figured out some other thing to do or whatever. But that happened too. So it was kind of like this extra bonus, extra gift of like, do you see how this works? Yeah, it is cool. And I share this story with you because this is Gene Key 27 baked into it. There's so much baked into 27 that is so beautiful. But it really speaks of this mythic role that we get to stand in when we actually get related to another. When enough of our own selves are met, that we can and have the capacity to get related to another. And that's really my intention. That's who I want to be in the world. That's what I want to evolve into. So it aligns with my intention. It's not haphazard. As Adyashanti says, awakening is spontaneous, but it's not haphazard. So that means that our intention matters. Our end game, our knowing where we're going matters. So if you take on for yourself, knowing where you're going, life is going to serve up lots of examples and experiences to get you there. And sometimes getting us there means that I got to go through a near-death experience, or means that I got to get scammed. As I was sharing before this, I started the recording of this live stream that during this eclipse week in the wormhole, someone called me or texted me having had a near-death experience, and someone texted me about having been scammed. And so whatever it is we need to become clearer and cleaner. And what I said to that person who got scammed, I said, yeah, so what was the fear? What was the fear that got tripped? It was a tripwire. And then you went into trauma. So instead of saying, I'm so stupid, how many of us do that when we get scammed? I'm so stupid that I fell for it. It's shameful. It's embarrassing. It's humiliating. And we just compound that by judging ourselves. And we miss the whole entire gold, which was, yeah, but what fear got triggered? How did it get you into trauma? What did that remind you of when you were younger? Because this is your opportunity served up to you by you, the capital YOU, the universe. It served it up to you so that you can eliminate, cancel, dissolve, acknowledge, accept, embrace, so that it dissolves that hook. You might still have that fear, but you now know it's a hook. You now know it's actually a trauma. It's a wound. It's a story that I'm carrying that creates a pattern in my existence, so that when someone does X, I do Y. And that was the inquiry that this person got to go on. And she's texted and said, yeah, I found the fear. I found the fear. So Gene Key 27, I didn't even say what the shadow was. The shadow is selfishness. The gift is altruism or philanthropy. And the siddhi is selflessness, no self. I'm going to call it that way because I think with the feminine, we get to transform a very old, collapsed feminine pattern, a shadow pattern. And that's what we're going to do inside of this conversation. This is the energy of 27, is the energy of giving and receiving. It's the energy that knows that there's a constant cycle of giving and receiving. And just as it looked like, oh, I'm giving to this person this parking space, I wasn't really giving. I was yielding to what wanted to happen, and I received the gift. That is the matrix of life, capital L. That's the real matrix of life. And so you can see that we have it all wrong. In our ego self, we have it all wrong. And that is what causes the shadow frequency of separation, of selfishness. I have to hold on to what's mine, because really underneath it, I don't exist. And therefore, I will never be able to receive anything. So I need to take it. And the collapsed version of that is what the feminine has been healing herself from. And I would venture that every person in this room right now has experienced that. And that is people pleasing. The shadow of people pleasing is the repressive side of Gene Key 27, where we actually are inauthentic. And people pleasing, kind of gets a little, I'm going to kind of unpack a little nuances. We get a little virtue signal inside of people pleasing. Like, I'm such a people pleaser. I'm such a martyr, actually. I'm such an overgiver. All I do is give. Yeah. Yes, there's that. And there's a piece of it where I get a lot out of it. I get to call myself superior. I get to think of myself as someone who can help other people, but no one can help me. And that's the shadow band that the feminine is working through right now. And I'm noticing that we're getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. We're being real with ourselves and what our desires are. And we're watching that the world is not falling apart because we have a desire or a preference or a need or a request. And so this gene key is quintessentially feminine because it understands this infinity symbol of the flow of life, that we're constantly in a giving and receiving. And that, one of the statements that my teacher made in this Tibetan Book of the Dead that I had heard from another teacher of mine, he was my brain guy back in 2008. And he said to me, as I was trying to figure out, and this is why I was into non-duality at the time, I was actually trying to figure out how to not suffer. I was in so much pain that when I heard about non-duality and that nothing existed and everything was an illusion, I was like, that sounds awesome. I'm going to go there, because then all this stuff is bullshit. And all, like, the elephants being murdered for their ivory tusk, all that is just, it's not actually happening. Thank God. I was kind of in that mode. Anybody relate? Yeah. So he said to me, you have to be a self before you can be no self. And that was repeated the other day in one of my lessons on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You have to be a self in order to be no self. So what we know is that states are included and transcended. You can't skip a state. So we can't go from being a selfless martyr and people pleaser to the siddhi of selflessness. We just don't make that jump. We got to be a self in the middle. And that might be uncomfortable. And that's the point of it. We've got to own our humanity. This is the ring of life and death. It's about what it means to be human. We've got to own our humanity. We've got to own our needs. And what I know about that is that if we're over here in people pleasing, then we're going to probably swing on the pendulum to over here in speaking our needs. I remember being in a partnership with a guy who all of a sudden discovered that he was a people pleaser, which that was not my experience of him because he fought me every step of the way. But to him, it occurred to him that there was just an inauthenticity. And the reason why he didn't have access to a lot of his life force energy, and he didn't have access to, he was actually, when I say life force energy, he was always exhausted. So if you're always exhausted, that's going to give you a clue that your energy is wonky. It's not clean. You're not in the pathway of giving and receiving because life always gives back. Waste equals food. Someone else's decay is someone else's food. Life is synergistic. And likewise, just like the experience in the parking lot with me, life is synergistic. I'm not exhausted by that. I'm actually filled up by that. So when he discovered that his exhaustion was related to people pleasing, and the gene keys really supported because his life work was touching on the shadow of exhaustion. What I knew was going to happen, and this is why I broke up with him. Just kidding. It was a lot more complicated than that. But I knew what was going to happen is he was going to swing all the way over here and start like, no, I'm not going to help you with that. No, I need this. I need that. I just knew he was going to take on the equal and opposite because that was the skin he was being asked to walk into. And I knew like, oh no, next time I'm going to sign up for someone who's integrated their shadow and now they're like swinging in the middle. And that's really where some of us get to go. We go from one side to the other side. You know, one of my other teachers would say, we always underdo or overdo something. And that was in relation to a particular archetype that he talks about, the ways that we get successful. We overdo or underdo. And so we can't really skip that sometimes. We have to overdo it in order to understand the bounds of it, what it feels like, because it's way new territory. We just don't know it. And then we start to come to that middle place where, you know, that pendulum starts to swing in the middle and we become nimble and we know ourselves. And the way that we exercise our boundaries isn't like a bull in a china shop. It's got grace to it. It's got finesse to it. It's got win-win to it. It's got yes and here's what I need now, because the capacities for subtlety have been cultivated. So you realize if you've been over in an extreme part of one frequency, like let's say you've really played in the repressive nature of the feminine as a people pleaser, as a martyr, feeling tons of guilt for even being on the planet, taking up airtime, breathing air or eating food. That's extreme. And I've felt that way before. Then we come over to the other side. It's going to feel super disorienting. And we're not subtle. We are like a bull in a china shop there because we don't have the cultivation of subtlety. And then the more that we play over there, we get feedback. People are going to give you feedback. And we get feedback, and that feedback, maybe if it's harsh or uncomfortable, it allows us to take in data, and the data gives us an attunement to the subtlety. And as we work with it over and over and over again, dropping into our bodies, feeling what our bodies feel, because our bodies are the instruments of truth. And that's a cultivation. It's already giving us signals. It's already been doing that. But we have to cultivate, we get to cultivate the subtlety and the attunement to listen to it. And what does it mean? What is it telling us? And that is the feminine art that's contained in Gene Key 27. Gene Key 27 people are awesome parents. They can be awesome parents because they really get the nurturing of a small being. They really get their responsibility inside of that. Gene Key 27 people are healers. They have the capacity to walk through fire and not get burned because their love is so great. Their philanthropy is so great. And I love that siddhi so much. When I first read it, I think this was the very first Gene Key that I ever read, because I did not go in order. That is not me. I don't like to follow order. So I just opened the Gene Key book. I think it was 27. I read it and I sobbed. It spoke to me because it spoke about our evolution. And I want to presence that here as well, because our evolution is so important to seed, to know where we're going. So as we go into selflessness, we're really going into the frequency of not being a separate self, of healing the duality. We will still show up as, we'll have the template as this. We'll still show up as an individual. We're not becoming an amorphous blob. We are retaining our individuality, but our consciousness becomes collective. And if anything, this is what I think AI is bringing to us. And so the solar plexus mutation, the center of awareness that's coming through, and over 50% of people have that as their authority. So like it or not, you've been on the wave of experiencing your emotions as a form of knowing. But also inside of that solar plexus is that awareness center that's coming online, is the sense of considering others, the sense of other people. And that, I feel like that's what came through me when I was speaking to that man over the parking space, because I heard something subtle, heard in me, like, this guy really wants this thing. I was kind of expecting that he'd be like, just take it. It's fine. It's yours. Whatever. But then I heard he really wanted it. And something awoke in me. I didn't do it. It just awoke in me that I realized that. And that right there gives me a glimmer of what our potential is, how we can play the game as a collective. So we're moving from this hyper empathy of feeling the collective and not knowing where we stop and someone else begins, and not having any boundaries, to a more subtle version of consideration. And that's what Gene Key 27 at the gift frequency, and that's the frequency that we're making the huge jump right now. Gene Key 27 is saying real philanthropy is generosity. It's from the heart. It's not from your shadow of, I don't even like conflict. I don't know how to have a conversation asserting my needs, so I'm just going to acquiesce. That's a whole different frequency. I could have done that exact same thing in the parking lot with that frequency, and I would have held resentment. And he would have probably held resentment, because it's no such gift to get a gift through resentment. But instead, the frequency got elevated through philanthropy. through consideration of another. And in that, it's a math equation, because in that experience, there was something in me, like I felt like there was like a deeper truth online, because that's how I tend to hold things, that there's a win-win, there's a deeper truth. If I really needed that parking spot, that person would have yielded. So I could feel inside myself as now that I look back on it, like a cosmic math equation. And it was like, I don't really need it. I'm good. I'm the one who's good. So we make those cosmic math equations from our subtlety, and that allows us the opportunity to be in service, to give to each other, to yield, but not so yield that you're off the map, that you're not a self. You bring your full self to that yielding. And then Gene Key 27 is, then you stand in the mythic role, and there is no self. There's just luminous emptiness, because luminous emptiness is love. And in the Tibetan Buddhism, emptiness doesn't mean emptiness. It means no thingness. And unfortunately, the Western world is very thing oriented. We even think consciousness is a thing. And that was seeded from Aristotle, who taught us the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who taught us about things and how to think in terms of things. And so that consciousness has been seeded in our way of thinking. And I'm undoing that through my studies with the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because there's no thing. Consciousness is not a thing. There's not a thing that's going to die and be reborn. So luminous emptiness is not the is not a, it's a fertile void, right? It's not just a void, it's a fertile void. It's the void with the luminosity. It's the void with the substrate of love. And so to end this transmission, that person who I talked about at the beginning, who asked that question about love, is there love inside of this Tibetan Book of the Dead, in the way that the Tibetans and the tantrics who wrote this magical work, was there any love there? And then she asked the question, which was, how do I experience that again? And the response was, open to it. Just open to it. And I think that's so beautiful, because it's just a micro shift in our awareness of who we're being. Just micro shift. Breathe. Open. And really receive what is already there. So if you had eyes to see and ears to hear, what would you see? What would you hear? My experience, and this is what I'm going to teach inside of my superabundance class starting on Tuesday, which if anyone, we have one more free spot. So if anyone would like a free spot inside that class, let me know, because I will share with you how to get that. But that's what I'm going to share inside that class, that the default mechanism is the shadow band is so thick that we have to reach for it. And we can reach through our intention, through our awareness, through our waking up. You know, Carlos Castaneda talks about the force of intention, and that it's like you grab hands with the force of intention. So awakening is spontaneous, but it's not haphazard. You matter. Your intention matters. How you play the game matters. Where you want to go in consciousness matters. So with that, I am complete. Let's rub our hands together just to end this section. And we'll go on our sisterhood activation afterwards. All right. And then let's beam out these vibrating hands. Let's beam them out at each other. Whether you're watching on the replay, feel the love that is already here. Feel the love that's vibrating in your hands already. Feel the love that's vibrating in your entire body. Feel the love that is surrounding you and bathing you. Feel the love that is holding you. And then feel the love that you are. And then flutter open your eyes and look out and see others and feel and see the love that they are. Yeah. So we gather all the positive energy, all this love energy that we have generated together, and we dedicate it to the merits. May all beings benefit from the merits of our efforts. Namaste.